So this here is a live bait tank. At the bottom of this live bait tank is some coral rubble, which is used for biological filtration. Because what happens here is live bait is placed in this tank so they can go fishing. So the good bacteria that will grow on the coral rubble will offer some biological filtration for the fish when they are in here. And there is lots of aeration. So there's lots of oxygen and constant water flow. So what basically happens is this pump is placed in there and water is pumped from there in here. Say half filled, because if you fill it up too much, you'll have a low surface area to volume ratio. Therefore, you can actually have less fish because you will run a lower redox potential. A lower water volume will give you a higher redox potential, a higher dissolved oxygen level, and will allow you to have actually more fish in actually less water. So we pump the water out, then we pump the water back in again, then we can put a new batch of live bait in here. The live bait might survive around 2 weeks or however long it needs to be alive until they go fishing. Then once that batch of live bait have gone, we then do the same thing again. Pop the pump in here, pump the water out, pop the pump in there, pump the water back in again, do a complete water change, maybe down to the last little bottom. The only thing surviving would be the bacteria that live amongst the gravel. And this just gets repeated. Now, the real variable here is how many fish can this keep? That's what we are about to work out. Because if we put too much live bait in here, the system will not be able to handle it. At the start, it's really important that we do not put too much live bait in here. We want to start minimally and we'll slowly work our way up. And over a period of weeks or even months, as more and more bacteria establishes in the substrate in the bottom, the more fish we can handle. And it also depends on how consistently this is occurring. But we really don't want to be feeding the fish during this time because the bait fish are going to produce too much waste, and therefore the volume will be too low. So we could feed if we've got very little fish, but if the population is high, we definitely do not want to feed. Anyway, keeps my days interesting. So now what I'm doing is filling the live bait tank up again. So basically I've got a pump in there. It's pumping the water back into here. I'm going to half fill it. At no time do I want it to be so empty that the bottom is dry, because I don't want to kill the good bacteria that grows in the bottom. The other thing that's going to happen over time is we're going to get all this algae growing all over the outside. And this algae is basically going to look horrendous, but has advantages as far as bio cover is concerned. So in this algae, we're going to grow bacteria, microorganisms, and so forth. And it's going to end up being a very good medium for the fish to feed on, and is going to help absorb some of the nutrients out of the water. Also going to help increase oxygen and other minor benefits. So by all means, we could give it a clean, but we're biologically probably better off leaving it alone to biologically establish. So the next thing we're going to do is put some fish in here, and the whole experiment becomes how many fish can we put in here and how long do they need to be here? Because what's going to happen is fish are going to go in there X amount at X size. Now if they go putting too many in, then more water changes need to be done, or they will start to die. So there's basically two options. One option is water changes occur more often. If you did a water change every day, it's probably going to take you 10 to 20 minutes of your life every day. And then you could probably house quite a lot of fish in there, because quite a lot of good bacteria would remain within the gravel. You'd have a bit of bio cover on the sides, and the regular water changes would stop the accumulants from being too severe. And there is quite a lot of oxygen. But it's all completely relative to how big the fish are and how long they're there for. So if you get a big batch in, they're there for a day or so, then you go fishing and Bob's your uncle. Maybe there's some leftovers. But what we need to be aware of is the bigger the fish, the less likely they're going to survive in here, and the less of them we can have. So basically this is one big game. The game is, how many are we going to get, how big are they going to be, and how long are they going to be here? Now if this is done consistently, we will have an answer to this question. If this is not done consistently, there will be no answer to this question, and it will be absolute trial and error. The other thing we can do is do water tests along the way, because the water test will give you a preview of what's going to happen. So if we're testing the water regularly, we can then make decisions based on water chemistry. If we're not willing to make that effort, then we're going to make decisions based on trial and error. So anyway, keeps my day interesting. Beats an office job, doesn't it? Now the most important thing about having equipment like this, these are pumps that we use for pumping the salt water from there to there, is rinsing them in fresh water. Because the longer these things are exposed to salt, regardless of the quality, the higher the quality of the pumps, and if they're designed for salt water, their life will undoubtedly be longer. But if we give it a rinse in fresh water and we do not keep it in the salt water, the pumps will survive for a lot longer. So in any of these sorts of conditions, anything involving boats and salt water needs a good old freshwater wash in order to preserve its life. And everything has a shelf life when salt is involved. Now the other two fun considerations that we have here is temperature. Hot days in summer are undoubtedly going to lead to lower dissolved oxygen level, lower redox potential, and lower ability to keep fish. It is likely that winter will be a much more successful endeavor for this particular project, but there is a lot of suck it and see here, so there's a lot of wait and see, and it will depend on the species that are chosen. So summer is more of a concern than winter due to temperature, because we are talking about temperate water animals to be kept in here. So if in doubt, add less. The other fun factor that we've got to play with is light. So the plan is to put a lid on it, which will be secured on top. Now we don't want it to be jet dark for them, so we definitely want some light to get in there, but we definitely don't want it to be fully exposed either, because if it is fully exposed, the amount of algae that'll grow in this water will be copious. So once again, the more water changes that are done, the less issues we're going to have with algae. The less water changes are done, the more issues we're going to have with algae. And the more light that we're exposing to this, the more algae we're going to get. So if we're in a position where we can put a lid on it, which is like partially open, then we have the ability to vary the amount of light going in here. So we're definitely not wanting it to be shut, but at the same time we don't want it to be completely open. So depending on the amount of shading that we're able to play with will govern how much algae we get in here, and how much algae we get in here will govern how many water changes we need to do, which is all trial and error. So this is now all ready for bait. So now we can let the fun begin. The only other thing we need to be aware of is that over time, this water is going to evaporate. So there will end up being a bit of a watermark along here, and you'll find that there'll be algae growing at a certain level. And what is really important is every now and then you need to top the water up with a bit of fresh water. If you're putting a tiny bit in at a time, you can just chuck a bit of tap water in there. It's only for bait fish. If it is going to be a larger amount, it's good to squirt a bit of water ager in there as well, because you'll be surprised how fast this evaporates. And one thing that is going to be very, very advisable is to put a lid on it. So there's a lid there. So putting the lid on the top will drastically reduce evaporation, but could be very fun on a windy day because if it's not weighted correctly and it's a super windy day, whoo, the wind might blow the top off, which could be interesting and definitely noteworthy. Fun little experiments we get to play around with.